So let me now introduce and ask our co-moderator and our chairperson of ARC to please share her screen and her talk with us. She'll be talking on managing cataracts and glaucomas in patients with uveitis. On to you, ma'am.
So thanks a lot. After having heard all the talks on uveitis, we can all imagine with that kind of a smoldering disease, managing a cataract and glaucoma in this setting is quite a disaster. So if you look at the statistics, what we see is uveitic cataracts contribute only 1.2% of all cataract surgeries, but in the uveitic patients, the cataract component is 12.2 to 68%. And the good news here is that there's a good percentage of these eyes which achieve more than 20/40, which should add confidence to our treatment patterns. And the incidence of CME is something very related to the chronicity and the intensity of the disease. So when we look at glaucoma in uveitis, it could present as an open angle glaucoma of rapid onset with high IOPs or wide fluctuations and even present with hypotony. It could be so asymptomatic in spite of the very marked inflammation in juvenile idiopathic arthritis. It is more common in anterior uveitis and a little less in pars planitis. And it could just present with a mild inflammation with a very high IOP in Poshner-Schlossen syndrome. When you look at the mechanism of glaucoma, what you see is, just 1 minute. What you see is, it could be an increased aqueous production because of the prostaglandin release. Again, it could be a decreased production of aqueous because of the ciliary body inflammation. Again, if you look at the drainage pattern, the uveoscleral outflow could be increased because of the prostaglandin release, but it could again be compromised because of the open angle mechanisms and the angle closure ones. Sunil, it's not moving. So then what is the open angle mechanisms? We all know it's because of the debris in the trabecular meshwork, the epithelial cells, the fibrin. In fact, on a gonio, you might even miss the kind of activity which is going on in the angle structures. There could be a neovascular membrane sitting there. And the component of steroid-induced open angle glaucoma takes at least 10 days to 2 weeks to appear. So because of the release of the inflammatory mediators, the iris gets stuck to the lens surface, and then there is iris bombay and pupillary block, PS and goniocynic cape. And if there is an inflammation of the ciliary body, that tends to swell with an anterior rotation of ciliary body, and that causes one more way of angle closure mechanism. When we look at the acute anterior uveitis, of course, we all have heard over the course that there's a lot of signs of anterior chamber inflammation. The IOP is generally low, but it could be high too, more specific in the herpetus type of anterior uveitis or this Poshner syndrome, or also like in sarcoidosis or Lyme's disease or toxoplasma retinochoroiditis and similar conditions. So then it becomes necessary for us to understand how the IOP control has moved on in the course of this disease. So it could be that it might have been a milder disease. So you need to look at the old records. Was there IOP control between the episodes? Was the patient on any anti-glaucoma medication? What is actually the etiology, the chronicity, and the intensivity of the case? Were potent topical steroids used, periocular systemic steroid used, or was the patient on ocular hypertensives? And that will define the course of the disease. Now, if this is a picture of a herpetic keratouveitis where the patient presented with high intraocular pressures, but with antivirals, with steroids, and with anti-glaucoma medication, the cornea did clear up and the eye did become quiet, but then the recurrent episodes led to a need of a tube at a later point. So again, when we talk of IOP control, we just need to do all the parameters, but one word about OCT, it doesn't make sense to do an OCT during the active phase of inflammation. Because of the inflammation, the RNFL thickness would be more, and you might erroneously think that the glaucoma is not as advanced as it is. So it becomes mandatory to control the inflammation. Not just that, cycloplegic, mydriatic, you might need to release the pupillary block with 1 or 2 LPIs because these could get clogged. You might really need to do a surgical PI, and you have to course your anti-glaucoma medications one by one as you keep adding on. And keep in mind that the steroid-induced may not present right away, could present after 10 days. As far as the role of prostaglandins, I do believe it's a great drug, could be used in many a situation, maybe not in a herpetic or if there is an obvious CME. When would you do a cataract surgery? You would definitely not look at doing it in an active stage. But if it is a lens-induced uveitis, or if there is a posterior segment intervention is needed, probably you would consider in that situation. But preoperatively, you would need your 3 months of quiescence. You have to definitely prognosticate the disease, whether there's a CME, whether there's a posterior segment pathology. A B scan is so important. Optic atrophy has to be considered, BSK. And of course, it is important to look at the status of the ciliary body, because that would also define how the course of the disease is going to be and whether you have to co-manage the intraocular pressure. Now, this is cyclitic membrane overlying the ciliary body, and you do expect a hypotony and not a great course of the disease. And of course, a CME picture as that would also tell you how to prognosticate. Preoperatively, if the patient is on immunomodulators, you would ask them to continue it. Sometimes it makes sense when they are on long-term oral steroids to give one rescue dose of IV methylprednisolone for 2 to 3 days, intensive topical steroids for a week or so before, and also oral steroids probably for a week or two based on the course of the disease. Intraocular pressure control is absolutely necessary, and a hydrophobic acrylic or less surface modified lenses would be the way to go. As far as the indications for trabeculectomy is concerned, there are these newer procedures which have started gaining a lot of upstage platform, but still we are not too clear about it. And if you were to do a cataract before, if a trab is to be done, I would advise that a cataract be done before, because following a trab, the anterior chamber tends to be a little narrower, and a cataract surgery becomes as challenging as being done in a small eye. Rather, it makes sense to do a phaco with a glaucoma drainage device. But you need, if you're going to do a trab, you need to titrate the dose of MMC, which has to be more than adequate. A tight flap closure is absolutely necessary because of the high incidence of hypotony, and the persistent inflammation and the post-op scarring has to be kept in mind. You have to keep them on topical steroids for a much longer time and should be ready to consider needling with full cover of steroids if necessary. So these tweaks are necessary: 0.4 milligram for 2 minutes, intensive anti-inflammatory post-op. Early releasable suture is very, very necessary because the aqueous flow definitely helps in modulating the bleb, and a 5FU injection along with needling or without it for a number of days based on the corneal staining has to be followed. Now, this is a case which looks inflamed, and you would expect a raised intraocular pressure. But when you look at the eye, actually, it had a little shallow anterior chamber and a hypotony because of the ciliary shutdown, and the bleb was flat. So you are in a confused state as to how you're managing the glaucoma. Again, now, sometimes you might be forced to go in for a see a very shallow anterior chamber, then you wonder whether your bleb is leaking, and then you see that the air is not retaining. Then you decide that you're going to go aggressively suture it. But then there comes a point when you realize that that is just not helping. Then you need to do your choroidal drainage, and it's the usual way, paucity of time I'm not showing you, but you need to adequately drain the choroidal fluid and then close up the eye. Again, when it comes to a cataract surgery, you need to make an anterior place lesion because there could be an iris prolapse. It could be a little floppy iris, just a little bit of cohesive viscoelastic. Don't over distend the chamber. Release the synechiae. That's very important. It makes sense to make these 4 ports a little anterior limbal ports because you need these pupil dilators so that you have an atraumatic surgery. Just the right size rexus, which the pupillary dilatation allows. Just a little bit of hydro. Don't over distend the capsule. You could remove a hook, but these cataracts are largely soft cataracts, and in no time you just have to carousel it out, and it's not a big surgical challenge at all. It's managing the cataract during this episode of inflamed eye is the major challenge. You need to polish the anterior capsule, and then enough viscoelastic, but not more, and inject the IOL with the cartridge well into the anterior chamber so that it doesn't get caught in the iris, and then ensure that the IOL is well captured into the rexus as it should be. And then, of course, you remove the viscoelastic in front and back of the IOL and follow it up with a subcutaneous injection of steroids. Intraoperatively, you should be prepared for a pupillary membrane peeling if indicated. You should avoid Prolin because it's a complement activation thing. And if an event of vitreous loss, triamcinolone is an important adjunct, has to be used. IVT and Ozurdex can be used if the case demands it. And if you were to do a PPC with AV, it is to be looked at if it's a younger age group. Post-operatively, intensive topical steroids is absolute indication, and oral steroids, as I earlier alluded to. All of these I have said in my earlier slides, and these have to be stressed again and again when it comes to managing a case of uveitis with cataract. Again, we need to be absolutely prepared for this picture of CME, deposits on the IOL, pupillary membranes, intense anterior segment inflammation, which has to be addressed. Keep in mind that these eyes could have a PCO component added on. And because of this, in spite of the fact that you would have got a nice round rhexis, because of the tendency for these eyes to phimose, because of the inflammation, you could even expect some areas of zonular weakness to give way. There could be an asymmetrical back contracture. There could be dislocation of the IOL and even subluxation in a situation. There are certain more important things which has to be looked in as the uveitis case tends to be more severe, like in VKH, wherein you need to understand that the visual prognosis is definitely going to be far more severe. Sympathetic ophthalmia, there could be such intense inflammation that you may not be able to place an IOL. Again, there could be reactivation of disease in toxoplasma retinochoroiditis and herpetic uveitis. Now, this was a patient of chronic anterior uveitis. If you look at the chart, there's a vacillation of high IOP and low IOPs. And when you looked at the patient, he had a lot of folds and hypotony was there. And then the eye showed that the bleb was absolutely flat. But when we did a ultrasound, what we found was that there was an anterior rotation of the ciliary body. And then again, we put him on course of topical steroids, oral steroids. The cornea did clear. The patient did get better. And then it appeared as if that even the B scan, that the choroid was settling, everything looked okay. But within 2 weeks, there was a steamy cornea with the patient presented with. And then again, we even had to do a DSEK at one point of time, but this patient did not do well. Again, intermediate uveitis, the chances of glaucoma a little less, but the picture is because of the inflammation of the ciliary body and the PS and the iris bombae, and these, all of them add on to create a situation of glaucoma. There are some specific entities like VKH, wherein it is typical. I mean, in this kind of audience, well, I mean, I need not discuss how VKH would look like, but what we need to know is we need to do a B-scan ultrasound when you would find sometimes that this supraciliary effusion is there, and that could be the reason that even though the eye had a PI, the AC was shallow, and you needed to dilate these eyes for the ciliary body to rotate backwards for the anterior chamber to deepen up. So besides, of course, cataract, glaucoma, all the other associated problems could be there. It could be a lens-induced glaucoma, with, again, a hypermature cataract with lens particle, or actually a lens matter in the vitreous. Even in SLE, you could easily diagnose it with the butterfly rash, the uveitis, and the characteristic neurological symptoms of an ataxic gait, but they could be associated with glaucoma, which has to be co-managed. Again, AIDS, Argemone, rubella, again, is a very dreaded disease, though less common now. But all of these, we need to be very conscious when you're managing along with uvea, the cataract, and the glaucoma component. Again, all of these, what one word of multiple sclerosis is, though a neurological finding should clue us that this patient could also have uveitis or pars planitis. Behçet's disease was so beautifully discussed, could have a variable glaucoma presentation, could be an open angle glaucoma, angle closure, or a neovascular glaucoma, but good results have been seen in TRAB surprisingly. Again, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, the glaucoma component actually sets in about more than 4 years later. But combining, doing TRAB is absolutely dismal in these eyes. And when you do a cataract surgery, you have to combine it with IVTA. So when you talk of glaucoma management, it could be an iris bombae, which needs PI, multiple PIs. This was again a case wherein in a pseudophakic eye, you did not expect this kind of a malignant glaucoma kind of picture. This is again another case which came in with a very shallow eye, post-vitrectomy and injections. But then what we found was that the lens was sitting way behind. There was a lot of some kind of a shadow between the iris and the lens. And when we went in through the PI and did a vitrectomy and removed all the fluid from there, the iris did fall back and the patient's cornea cleared and the patient settled down. However, the patient went on to develop a decompressive retinopathy and the AN, and that was an end to this case. So essentially, there are certain broad principles which we need to keep in mind. During active inflammation, it has to be intense topical steroids and cycloplegics, anti-glaucoma medications. We definitely need to avoid pylo and probably prostaglandin in some situations. Be prepared for wide IOP fluctuations. I do not believe that SLT, ALT have any value, nor the micropulse treatment. trabeculectomy in some eyes, which have just a mild case of uveitis or a large stage of quiescence, you could think of combining with mitomycin, a varied success rate. GAT in some very selected cases with open angles. GDT, the Bavard seem to be good, more promising, but then their risk of hypotony is there, whereas AGV is safer but has a low success rate. But because of the release of these inflammatory mediators, you might have done a great anti-glock Ahmed valve implant, but then you might find that the fibrovascular growth comes in and covers over the entire device, and then you may have to cut open that capsule and then give up the membrane which is lying inside, and then it may have to just ligate the tube and leave it to function like a Bavard's implant. I'm not showing you this video because of paucity of time, but I would like to conclude that when it comes to dealing with cataract and glaucoma in a setting of uveitis, more often than not, it's about striking a compromise, because you're never too sure that you're going to achieve the ideal status, which we cataract surgeons do try to achieve. Rather, we take pride in calling a cataract surgery a refractive cataract surgery, but that scenario is never achieved in a case of uveitis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those great cases and for that great illuminating talk. Just one question for you. Are there any specific conditions where you will prefer to leave your patients aphakic rather than putting an IOL? Which are the ones where you would prefer leaving a patient with a good aphakia rather than probably putting an IOL in these cases?
Especially in the younger children, I think, and of course, cases like sympathetic ophthalmia or any of those very inflamed eyes, we might
phaco anaphylaxis.
Huh?
Phaco anaphylaxis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lens-induced uveitis.
Yes, yes.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Any other opinions or any other comments from any of our panelists? Dr. Ratna ma'am, Dr.
Good
JB
show.
sir.
Good show. Very
Yeah.
good. And you discuss about the more common uveitis. I'm so happy. So 40% of our uveitis are anti-AR uveitis, and the clinicians, general ophthalmologists deal with these cases. And a lot of times we go on into that very hot type of cases like viral retinitis, which is not that very common. So anti-uveitis is a common, and it is dealt in details. I am quite happy.
And all the speakers did so well.
Yeah, very
And
well.
Dr. Chitra, your talk was so good. Even though it was
So it took
last
you away
talk.
from uvea and brought you into cataract world. So it's always interesting. I actually started enjoying your sessions more, but let me give my conclusive remarks. I'm so sure we owe our very immense thanks to our great expert panel who brought in so many dimensions into this very enlightening webinar. And of course, every single speaker here who brought in so many salient points. If I found it interesting, I'm sure the attendees would have learned a lot, and it must have enhanced their learning significantly. My special thanks to my very versatile moderator, Dr. Mudit. Thanks for being there. Such a huge mental support it was. And my thanks are always due to my very strong ARC team, though they are very muchly significantly absent today and have left me lonely today. My thanks, of course, are due to the AOS admin team headed by Kripal for all their support and encouragement at every point of time for me. My thanks are due to our webinar admin, Mr. Sunil. You must have known how energetic and active and supportive he's been always for me. Our thanks to Sai and Manjula. You all may not know, but they do a lot of background support for me. And finally, and most importantly, my thanks are due to every single attendee of AIOS who have been with us in all the webinars in this last 1.5 years. Believe me, it's that one presence of yours which eggs me on to try my best to do better and better with this great set of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.